We are in the shadow of Yom Kippur, and we are going to be somewhat industrious today, somewhat brave, because we're going to examine what has to be one of the strangest rituals in our tradition, one which obviously we no longer perform. It was attached to the Beit HaMikdash, and yet it's a ritual that warrants our examination. And that's the ritual, which I call the ritual of the sent goat. All right, now everybody uses this term scapegoat, and that's the word that's been used throughout history. But the Hebrew term is Seir HaMishtaleach, which literally means the sent goat. And we're going to try to understand what this ritual is all about. If you take a look at the top of page 1, you'll find that the first 2 paragraphs underscored the source of this ritual. Tell us what exactly is supposed to happen. First section, Meyadas b'nei Yisrael yikach shnei sirei yizim lechatos. Aaron should separate from the people 2 he-goats lechatat, as a sin offering. The rabbis tell us that these 2 goats were supposed to be as much as possible identical. You had to have, if you could, you had to have 2 goats that were the same color, the same size, as much as possible. And then what does Aaron do? V'nasan Aaron al shnei asirim goralot. You should take lots. 1 go roll for Hashem and 1 go roll for Azazel. L'shalach oso la'azazel hamidbara. The second goat is to be sent out into the wilderness to some destination known as Azazel. Next, go down to the next part of the page. V'samach Aaron es shtei yadav al rosh ha'so'ir hachai. Aaron should place his hands upon the living goat. One of the goats has just been slaughtered as a korban. So now we're dealing with the living goat, which is the Seir La'azazel. And he shall confess kol pishehem lechol chatosam. He should confess on the head of the this goat all of the sins of Klal Yisrael that they are guilty of. He should make a vidui, and then v'nasan otam al rosh ha'sa'ir. He should place them on the heads, literally place them on the head of the goat. V'shalach biyad ishti hamidbara. And he's supposed to send it out biyad at the hand of something called an ish iti, which is another shear as to what an ish iti is. But it's a person, to take the pashat shot that many say, it's ish iti, someone who's prepared, someone who knows what he's doing, someone who can do the job well and isn't going to have to wander around in the desert. He knows exactly where he's going. Okay. The rabbis acknowledge the problem with this ritual. They understand it because we look at it and we're baffled. What is this all about? It seems to be counterintuitive based upon everything we know about Judaism. What, I'm placing sins on the head of a goat? This really doesn't make much sense. It's against tshuva is a personal process that we're supposed to do on Yom Kippur. What are we being taught by this ritual? So the first acknowledgement at the bottom of the page is the rabbis say, Es chukosai tishmoru, you shall observe my chukot, word specific, my statutes. Dvarim sha'asoton v'umo sa'olam meishivim olav. What are chukim? They are laws which give fodder to the nations of the world and Satan to attack us, to question. In other words, these are so puzzling, even though we might accept them, that the nations of the world are going to use this for fodder. They're going to say, "Oh my goodness, you guys have a sent goat. You put out a sent goat. You put out chatoim, sins on the head of the goat. It's ridiculous. What's going on here?" The second source is even more interesting. And by the way, that source then lists a number of chukim, of which the Seir HaMishtaleach is one.
Is there a difference between chukot and chukim?
No, no, not to my knowledge. Or, what? Excuse me.
Say Pukim is Pukim that we don't know, so it's like I don't know. It sounds like an added giving of semi-reason, but we always learn Pukim is with no reason.
All right, we'll see. We'll get to that in a minute. We'll get to whether Chukim have a reason or don't have a reason in just a moment. But so misunderstood was this ritual in the time of the Mishnah that a change was made in the process. If you take a look at the Mishnah on page 2, V'keves asuoso, mipnei shahabavlim hayu metalshim besaro va'omri lo toltsei. They erected a ramp to put the goat out of the reach of the populace. Because before that ramp was there, what was happening? The Bavlim, those who were the Babylonians, and the rabbis say, some of them say it's not the Babylonians, it's someone else, but it were people within the context of the community. What were they doing? They were pulling at the hair of the goat, and they were going, go, 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 get out of here. In other words, take our sins, go. The rabbis were so upset that this was the perspective of that populace that what did they do? They erected a ramp. The goat was now outside the reach of the people, and they couldn't treat it that way, and they couldn't interpret it that way. Okay. So before we get to the Sira Mashalech itself, now that we've noted the problems with it and the admission of Chazal concerning those problems, let's take a look at the concept of Chukim in general. And the two psukim are very powerfully foundational. And they are, if you take a look at page 2, section 3, they're found in Parshas Kedoshim. Lo titor tikom v'lo titoret b'nei amecha v'yohavta l'reacha kamocha ani Hashem. You shall not take revenge or bear a grudge against your neighbor. Love, and I'm going to actually quote this phrase as it should be quoted, not as it's always quoted. V'yohavta lireacha kamocha, love for your neighbor as for yourself. Now let me explain what I'm saying here. And this is, again, another shiur, but very quickly. You're not supposed to love a neighbor as much as you love yourself. The Ramban says it outright in quoting Gemaras. If I'm on a desert island, and I have enough water to sustain me until I'm rescued and someone else is there, and if we split it, we're both going to die, do I have to give him water? No. If there's a fire, and my house is on fire, and his house is on fire, am I supposed to run and save his house or my house? So the halacha is that you're not supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. What is, the Ramban explains, it is love for your neighbor what you would love for yourself, meaning want for him or her what you would want for yourself. And that, you see, love your neighbor as yourself is not doable. I mean, it's like, we're saying, oh, wonderful, wonderful, yes. Want for your neighbor as for yourself is tremendously difficult, but doable. If you're applying for a job, and there's two of you, and your neighbor gets the job, you're supposed to try to be as happy for that person as you would be if you had gotten the job. Now, when I say it's tremendously difficult, it's tremendously difficult, but it's doable. It can be done. In other words, I can train myself to be so selfless. Now, have I done that yet? Not yet. And have you done that yet? Perhaps, maybe you have, but it's a very difficult, but that's the literal translation. You don't love someone else as yourself. You want for someone else what you want for yourself. Yes?
Let's say it's you and a Rav of the community, let's say. Maybe you should try to save his house before yours.
The answer is I'm not obligated to do it, even if I'm the Rav of the community. If what is mine is endangered and what is his endangered, mine takes priority. That's the halacha. Now, would a rabbi make a cheshbon and say, I don't want to get fired, I'm going to go to save it? So whatever, who knows? But the answer is there's no obligation on anybody to say, to treat possessions of someone else over your own.
Even a Sefer Torah in the house?
That's different. That's different. If Sefer Torah is in the house, then I'm not dealing with his possessions and my possessions. I'm dealing with a whole different issue. Okay, now that's the first pasuk, which has nothing to do with our shir, but it's very important. The next pasuk, Es chukosai tishmoru, observe my chukim, or my chukot, observe my chukim, behem techol tarbiyah kelayim, you should not create mixtures of animals, you should not wear a mixture of wool and linen. These are chukim. Now, on these psukim, Rashi and the Ramban have a very significant difference if we take them literally. Rashi says, if you take a look, chukim elu gzeros melech she'ein ta'am ledavar. Rashi says, chukim are mitzvot of a king, literally, which have no reason. All right, now I saw I changed the translation here, because the translation was that have no reason that we know. That's not literal. Literally it is have no reason. Along comes the Ramban on these same psukim and says, "Ve'ein hakavona bohem shetei gzeres hamelech malchei amlochim b'shum makom below tam." It's absolutely wrong to assume that any one of the statutes given by a Kodesh Baruch Hu is reasonless. It has a reason, but we don't know it. And now, this is particularly important. Why? Because it ties into another machlokas, which is, am I allowed to search for reasons in chukim? All right? If the Torah gives me, if there's no reason, then I'm not supposed to. If there is a reason, I don't understand it, I'm being challenged, maybe I should try. Now, Rashi, by the way, actually gives us a reason for chukim in his statement that there is no reason for chukim. What is it? Look how he couches it. He says, Elu gzeras hamelech, these are the statutes of a king that have no reason. Now, if you're a subject of a king, and he ordains 10 laws, and you go ahead and you say, 9 of them make sense, but that 10th I'm not going to observe. Are you showing loyalty to the king? No. It's when you observe that 10th that you show loyalty to the king. So when Rashi says, what's he saying? He's saying, if you take him literally, he's saying, they have no reason, but they have a reason. That reason is, it's to show loyalty to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And I'm going to tell you a quick story about what hoops we will go through to avoid observance of chukim and to rationalize it. A number of years ago, I was in Englewood for maybe about 10 years as a rabbi. Someone came up to me and said, Rabbi, you don't know what's going on. You don't know that on Saturday night, your congregants are going to the diner. They're eating out in a non-kosher restaurant. And not only that, but when we go out to that with them, they're pressuring us to go to the diner. And now this is in Bergen County, which did not have as many restaurants then as it does now, but it had enough. You didn't have to go to the diner, so it was ridiculous. So I saw red. First of all, I was upset that I had not even known this was occurring. And secondly, I got up the next morning, the next Shabbos morning, turned to the community and said, quoted these two psukim. And now what's strange about these two psukim is that the leap that they make from one to the other, that Torah makes from one to the other. Love your neighbor as yourself, observe my statute. The first is something that's at the pinnacle of understandability. The second, why are you making it from something to totally... So I said the reason is perhaps that the Torah wants us to recognize that these sets of laws are equally important. And statutes that you understand are not more important necessarily than statutes you don't understand. You've got to, and I said there is one particular statute that we don't understand the reason for, it qualifies as a chok, which has come to my attention as not being properly observed in the community. And I said, come to my attention that some of you will go out and eat at non-kosher restaurants at the diner on Saturday night. I want you to know. And I went through Rachel B'Traktana. I said, understand, if you eat tuna fish at the diner, you may be eating treif. You may be eating chicken filler to fill up the tuna fish. Tuna fish requires hashgacha. If you eat the French fries at the diner, they're being cooked in grease. You don't know what they're being cooked in. So I went through it very specifically. The place went crazy. After the davening, people came up to me and said, Rabbi, why are you talking about this? Don't talk to us about this. Talk to us about lofty ideas. Talk to us about Judaism. All right, so, and it went crazy to a point that had never gotten crazy before. In other words, this really hit home. So the next Shabbos, I got up and I gave what I call Diner 2. That first speech was Diner 1. This is Diner 2. Diner 2 was the following. I said to them, first, I went through some of the things that they had brought to me during that commotion, which showed their ridiculousness. I said, some of you said to me the rabbi's upset that wasn't invited to the Italian restaurant. I made up a couple, but this one I really got. And this is amazing to me. The rabbi said that it was not kosher. If he would have said it was treif, then that means it's really treif. But he only said it's not kosher, so that's not really. They were rolling in the aisle, laughing at themselves. And then I turned to them and I said something, which I gave the shiur before and I didn't remember to say this. It's important. I turned to them and I said, I'm not telling you what to eat. I'm telling you to be honest with yourselves. If you go out tonight and eat in the diner, don't claim that you're keeping kosher. That's all. Recognize what the truth is, recognize what is, and if you then want to go out and eat non-kosher food, go right ahead. That's your prerogative. That sermon changed behavior because people came up to me and said, Rabbi, you're right. We were, and one person came up to me, for example, and said, I've been very lax when I take trips through Europe. I'm going to change my approach. I'm going to be much more honest with what it is that I'm eating and what it is that's kosher. Okay, so anyway, the chukim are not easy. They're not easy because they don't have reasons and they are easily attacked. Now let's take a look at some potential reasons for Sir HaMishtalech. And we're doing this with the recognition that we're taking one position in an important debate, which is, can you search for reasons?
Why isn't the reason for a mistake good enough? Why isn't the reason? Why isn't it because Hashem said so, you're not going to listen?
That's it. That's what Rashi says. That's Rashi's point. Rashi's point is, this is enough of a reason. You don't have to, the Ramban says, no, you have a right to explore. But not everyone agrees with that. There's some people who say you have no right to examine chukim, because if I take Rashi literally, the whole point of a chok is that I'm loyal to the king without understanding the chok. If I'm trying to understand the chok, then I'm not showing loyalty to the king. The Ramban would disagree. The Ramban would say you can search for reasons as long as you recognize two things. Number one, the reason you come up with might not be the reason, right? In other words, you're just using your intellect and that's maybe not sufficient to understand. And number two, you will not make your observance of this ritual contingent upon that understanding. In other words, if someone comes up and says, pigs were not healthy to eat in those days, but now they're healthy to eat, so that was the reason we were told not to eat it, and now it doesn't apply anymore. All right? No. You're not allowed to, it's in the Torah, it's commanded by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you can search for reasons, but you have to accept it. Yes?
Does Sefer HaChinuch issue a caveat? You have to be careful?
Does the Sefer HaChinuch issue a caveat? I'd have to look at, I didn't see the Sefer HaChinuch. The Ramban doesn't issue a caveat.
That's try to get reason.
Right, yeah. The Ramban says you have a right to search for reasons. And in fact, on the spot, he gives a reason for shatnez, which is one of the chukim that's listed here. And that is, which the Torah was talking about. And he says God created the world the way he created it. We should not feel that we can always make it better by doing combinations and this and that, and we should respect the natural order. Yes?
Request, when someone asks a question from the audience, can you repeat the question?
Okay, good question. When I am being...
Because if you don't hear the question, it's hard to understand.
Okay, it's hard to understand the answer if you don't hear the question. Okay, gotcha. Okay, now, 2 more comments quickly. Yes?
Isn't it written in the Torah, or one has learned, I have learned, that Pukim don't have reason. So why are we now?
Because we're taking a position in the debate. The debate is, and my argument would be the following, that all the reasons we'll come up with are valuable. Whether they are really the reason for the Sira Mishtaleach, nonetheless, all the lessons are valuable. So I'm potentially learning valuable lessons from, but it's dangerous, and you have to be careful, and you have to accept those 2 caveats. You have to accept that you may not whatever you come up with may be totally wrong, and you're not going to make your observance contingent on your understanding. If you accept...
That you can't have Shabbos. There's no reason. So that's it. There's no reason.
Well, okay, not a lot of people are not willing to accept that. The point is, and so the Ramban gives a reason. Now, does he say it's definitely the reason? No. Is the message that he is learning from Shatnez worthwhile, which is we have to respect the natural order of the world? It's a worthwhile message. Yeah. Last comment, then we got to move on.
Shatnez only refers to linen and wool and not other plants and animals.
So that's a weakness. Okay, I'll repeat that. The problem with the Ramban's explanation of Shatnez is it only applies to wool and linen. If you were not to respect the order, you shouldn't be able to put wool and other things together. So the answer is that's a weakness in the Ramban's explanation, right?
If someone adds to that, would that be?
If you add to that, you are not right. So the answer would be the following. You are not allowed to add to that. The rabbis are allowed to create fences around it and add laws, but they cannot say that the laws they're creating are the 614th commandment of the Torah. In other words, we have to recognize that the rabbis had the right across time to create gidorim, to create fences around existing law. The only way to do that is to create more law.
And the other comment is that I have once learned that it's the Gzera Shabbat Kashrut, aspect of Kashrut, and Shatnez. But we are so careful with Kashrut, and Shatnez, we'll buy it first and check it.
Well, the answer, it's a good point. It's a very important point. We're careful. We've accepted kashrus across the board in the observant community, but a lot of us don't observe Shatnez. And in fact, it was years ago, there was one person in New York who really, it was a little man on the east side, right, or whatever, and you had to go to him to check whether you have Shatnez. Okay, let's go on.
Could wool and linen be just a prototype?
Could wool and linen be a prototype? No. That's, again, what we're saying is that that's the Torah law. Now, is it a prototype in terms of our understanding? Meaning, don't mix these and recognize by not mixing these that you're supposed to respect the natural world? Yeah. So in that way it's a prototype, but it's not a prototype that says wool and linen don't mix, so don't mix rayon and nylon. I mean, whatever, okay? All right, now let's go to page 3. So against some of your objections, we're going to try to understand Sira Mishtaleach. All right, so the first answer that is given, the first approach, is the Rambam. The Rambam basically says that the Sira Mishtaleach is the culmination of an already existing pattern. He says, if you take a look at the Karbanot, he says, the Karbanot that were taken or given for serious sins were not offered on in the temple. They were offered outside the temple. Right? And he talks about what those what are those chatoim gedolim. Therefore, and what was the concept? The concept was that these acts were so onerous that I'm going to offer this sacrifice outside the Beis HaMikdash. I'm going to say I want to have no part of what this represents. I want to atone, and it gets eaten up completely by the fire, those particular korbanei chatat. And therefore, what I'm doing is I'm treating it, I'm saying, I reject my behavior, I reject what happened. There's no place in the Beis HaMikdash. And if that's the case, says the Rambam, it's not a large step to say that when you are confessing all of the sins of all of the people on the holiest day of the year, what are you going to do with that animal? You're not going to put it on the Mizbeach. You're going to send it far away. You're going to basically reject it entirely. And therefore, this is the culmination of a pattern that exists within the karbanot. Certain karbanot are called reach nichoach. They are a pleasing savor to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and those are the ones that are offered within the Beis HaMikdash. These chataot are not, and therefore they're offered outside, and that symbolism is extremely important. That's the Rambam. Turn to the next page. A much more I'm sorry. I didn't want you to say. The Beis HaMikdash? I didn't. Right.
Even further.
Correct. Even further. Correct. Even further. And therefore, the Seir Lazazel is just a continuation of that pattern and a culmination of that pattern. All right. Now, thank you. Section number B on page 4. A more contemporary, not totally contemporary, 1700s commentary, Ksava HaKabbalah. What? No. Yechiel, I'm trying to remember. No, it's not Rottenberg. I'll remember it, but I don't remember it now. Okay. Ksava HaKabbalah basically says the following. If you look in the Torah, there's a pasuk that says, V'lo yizbechu od es hazivchehem lasi'irim asher hatem heim zonim acharehem. They will no longer, if they follow these laws, they will no longer offer karbanot, se'irim, particularly goats, right, to the gods that they're taking on. So what's happening, says the Ksava, in the time of the Torah, people were worshiping goats, satyrs, S-A-T-Y-R. All right, and basically this was worming its way into the Jewish, God knew it would worm its way into the Jewish behavior, and therefore what did he say? Take a goat, which these people worship, treat it with contempt. Show them that you were rejecting the God that they are bowing down to. And that becomes a Seir Lazazel, becomes a recognition that we have to reject. We're rejecting that which we have to reject. Now, this is very important because, again, I think it carries a Musar Haskel for us, even though we don't worship goats. And that is, we have to be sensitive to the things of the environment around us that are antithetical to what we believe. And sometimes those things are very tempting, and sometimes those things are not as clear as a worshipped goat. Particularly in our time, where the outside world is invading our lives in such a powerful way, so much more than 10 years ago, 15. Every year, it's more and more and more and more, and it's invading not only our lives, but our children's lives. And there's a dance that we have done throughout history. And that is, how have we related to the outside world? On the one hand, Have we accepted things from the outside world into our tradition? The answer is yes, right? Gefilte fish isn't in the Torah. Cholent isn't in the Torah. These were things that we picked up or created, whatever, but from our environment. However, at the same time, we had to be vigilant enough to reject that which we could not accept. And that it would have been easier to say, as some will, reject the outside society entirely. You can't learn anything from them. It's all shtus. It's a lot harder to say there's value. The Talmud says, if someone tells you there's chachma in the goyim and the non-Jews have wisdom, believe them, right? There are aspects of the outside world that could potentially be worthwhile for us. But we have to be vigilant enough to push out those things like this seir that are...
Did any parsha say that has to do with the dipping of the blood, Yosef's coat in the blood?
Does anybody say it has to do with the dipping of the blood, Yosef's coat in the blood? I did not encounter that in my studies, but it could be. I wouldn't be surprised if someone comes up with that as well. What? I'm sorry. This is a chatat. Is a karban chatat a seir because of the sale of Yosef? I think I seem to remember there's something about that. So, good. Last comment for now. Yes.
It's interesting that it's static throughout the generations, but the objects of the Avodah Zarah change.
Right. So you would think, therefore, that if we were going to take this approach literally, that we would change and send out a Maserati to the desert, right? All right? So, because now we worship other things. It's a good point. It's a limitation to this explanation. Yes? Mecklenburg. Thank you. Right.
Who spoke against
Reform Judaism. Right. It fits in with what we're saying, because he's saying you have to reject elements of the outside culture. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, next. The Abravanel, going back now to the era of the Rishonim, going back to the Spanish commentary, the famous Spanish commentary of the Abravanel. He says as follows: Datihu shehayu shnei hasi'irim hahem remez le'esav v'Yaakov. Shehayu shneim shavim b'nei. The bottom of page 4. Bottom of page 4 and into page 5. Shehahem remez le'esav v'Yaakov. Shehayu shneim achim b'nei ish echad, etc., etc. Therefore, they're supposed to be alike as much. And what you're doing is you're saying our goral, the lot that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given to us, is Yaakov. It enters the temple. And the goral that God gave to Esav, right? Goral means lots, so we were drawing lots. Is that the Esav is not part of that.
I find that very strange, because Yaakov and Esav were completely unlike each other.
Well, that's the point. The point is, we don't know, when you say they were unlike each other, it's very possible that they looked alike. It's very possible they were the same height. I mean, someone once said you can go through the entire Torah and not know what color Moshe's eyes were, right? Because the Torah doesn't give you that information. So what we're saying is they were both twins, they were both from the same mother, both from the same father, and they went totally different paths. And the Rabbi Avanel says that we should see ourselves and our lot as different from the lots of those around us. And in our world today, in the United Nations, for example, it's very clear. Right, so that, and by the way, to take it a step further, and we're going to run out of time if I'm not careful. Esav, to Chazal, was the symbol of Rome. All right? Now, if you've ever visited Rome, Rome to the rabbis symbolized the outside power, right? The external power that was antithetical. They said if someone tells you, very beautiful statement, if someone tells you that Jerusalem and Rome are both standing, don't believe him. If someone tells you that Jerusalem and Rome are both destroyed, don't believe him. If someone tells you that Jerusalem is existent and Rome is destroyed, believe it. If someone tells you that Rome is existent and Jerusalem is destroyed, they're so antithetical that they cannot be in the same world. All right, now that's a powerful statement. Now what's happening here is therefore, excuse me?
Isn't a Goral, isn't a not something arbitrary?
Yes, so in other words, in this explanation, God has given look, the truth is we are products both of Goralot and our own efforts, right? In other words, we were born, many of us, Jewish. So the fact is, I could have been born not Jewish. Would I have chosen to be? So the Goral is there. And that'll bring us to the next point. But here what he's saying is, I want to differentiate between you and them. And that differentiation on a national level is very important. So these are critical messages, I think, that emerge. They may not be the reason for the Sir Lazazel. Go ahead.
What are the main reasons that you can give against what the Arabs say, that the Torah doesn't mean Abraham,
Yitzchak.
Yitzhak, it means
All right, that's a whole different topic. That's a whole different topic. I just don't have the time to get into it. Maybe we'll talk it in a future time. But okay, now let's go to the next to last one that I'm bringing, and that's Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, down at the bottom of the page, who also dealt with the Reform community and fought it and changes in liturgy. It was a brilliant, brilliant man. He says, he offers what I would have thought is the most logical explanation, which is two similar goats standing before the temple. One goes one way, one goes another way. What does it symbolize? It symbolizes every one of us. We all stand at the tent of the temple, at the door of the temple, and we have a choice. Am I going to go this way or am I going to go that way? And therefore, the Goralot, seeing that and seeing the totally different pathways that take place, teaches us that we have choice, that our lives are like that. We have to recognize that. We on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, we have to recognize the things that are outside our control, but we also have to recognize the things that are within our control. But now I want to and we're going to skip number 4 because that would take much too much time. We're going to go to number 6, to page 6. All right, here we're encountering what I think is perhaps the most fascinating of the issue approaches that we've taken, and probably and definitely the most difficult. The Ibn Ezra, an early commentary on the text, basically does something very interesting. Apparently does it sometimes within his text. He says, I want you to know that the real reason, or the one real reason for the Siyar Mishtaleach is so controversial, so explosive, that I'm not going to tell it to you outright. But if you look at page 6, the top of the page, Im Yacholta lahavin hasod shehu achar hamira azazel, tehesod sozo v'sod shemo. If you take a look at the word Azazel in the Torah, and you you understand its placement or whatever, you will understand its secret and the secret of its name. And then he goes on and says the following. Va'ani hagalel lecha ktsas, and you can almost see him smiling when he does this. I will reveal it, a piece of it to you, beremes. When you are 33 years old, you will understand this reason. What the? That's it, right? So what's he talking about? So along comes the Ramban, who is not exactly a contemporary, but basically from the same time frame as Ibn Ezra, and they often talk with dialogue. And he starts off and he says the following: Hine Rebbe Eliezer ruach mechase davar. The Ibn Ezra was smart enough to cover something up. Va'ani harachil hamegale, and I will be the talebearer that reveals his secret. And what's his secret? If you count 33 psukim from the first mention of the word Azazel, you end up with that statement we had before, Velos, they will not offer to the Seirim anymore, that pasuk that I quoted for you before. So if you count 30, that's what he meant by 33. You have to count 33 psukim from the first mention of the word Azazel, you'll end up at that pasuk. But then the Ramban says something very interesting. He says, instead of interpreting the pasuk as we did, as was done before, which is that's a rejection of this worship, he quotes a medrash that says, all right, the pasuk is down below on page number 6. Lo yizbechu od esivchehem l'seirim, etc. He quotes a medrash, and the medrash says the following: Lefichoch, therefore, hayu nosnim lo l'samoel, they would give, they were told to give by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, shochad, which literally means bribery, to Samuel, b'yom HaKippurim. You were supposed to give the devil, let's say. You're supposed to offer to the devil on Yom Kippur as bribery that he should not sway you, should put you. What is going on? This is exactly what we were trying to say we're not going to accept, right? Which is that the Sir Azazel is an offer to another god or to another force. And the Ramban elaborates on Yom Kippur. Look at the underlined section on page 7, number 4. The Holy One, blessed be He, commanded us, we send a goat to the wilderness, to the force that rules in desolate places. Now, once he says that, he then twists and turns to say, wait, you really have to understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we're offering a carbon to the devil. I'm saying that God commanded us to recognize that force, right? And to offer something to that force on Yom Kippur. Now, how can we understand that? I think she said the Yetzer Hara, and we're going to take that further. What is being said here? And if you look at the English at the bottom of page 7, it's a section, actually a selection from one of my books. Commitment to tshuva, positive behavioral change, is doomed to failure without a recognition of the power of evil and sin. You've got to admit the temptation. You've got to recognize the strength. You've got to recognize the power of what's attracting you elsewhere. And in particular, you have to recognize the power of the Yetzer Hara. If you go through Yom Kippur denying it, denying the fact that sometimes you're jealous, denying the fact that sometimes you get upset for nothing, denying, what's going to happen is you're going to do it again. You're not taking care of it. You have to recognize the pull. And therefore, what the Ramban is saying is, you're giving a nod, if you will, to the strength of the Yetzer Hara, or to the strength of evil on Yom Kippur. And you're recognizing that you have now what do? take a look at something very interesting. Turn to the next page. And with this we'll close. The Medrash says something very interesting on one of the psukim in Bereshis, the end of creation story, before Shabbos. It says, Vayar Elokim es kol asher asa, God saw everything he made, v'hinei tov miot. And behold, it wasn't just tov, but it's tov miot. So what does that mean? What does it, the whole question of Vayar Elokim ki tov, what does it mean God saw it was good? If he saw it was, he knew it would be good before he made it. It doesn't have to see that it's good after I build something, I'll see it's good after I make it. So the Ramban will say that every time it says Vayar Elokim ki tov, what it's saying is that God is moving from a position of creating to sustaining. He's reached a point in the creational process where it is where he wants it to be, and he's now sustaining it. And says the Ramban, if he were to withdraw his presence for a moment, we would revert back to the tohu vavohu that preceded creation. We would revert back, and this is people's explanation for the concept of Hester Panim. Rav Soloveitchik talks about this. But what does the Medrash say is tov miod? Take a look. Rav Nachman bar Shmuel bar Nachman, b'shem Rav Shmuel bar Nachman, all right? Rav Nachman, the son of Shmuel, the son of Nachman, said in the same of Shmuel, the son of Nachman. So in other words, his father, all right? And what did he say? Hinei tov ma'od ze yetzer tov. V'hinei tov ma'od, the extra vav, ze yetzer hara. The yetzer hara is very good. Why? He goes on to say, Elule Yetzer Hara, if we would have the Yetzer Hara, Lo Bana Adam Bias, we wouldn't build, we wouldn't, Lo Nasa Isha, we wouldn't have lust and we wouldn't get married. Lo Holid, we wouldn't have children. In other words, the Yetzer Hara is not inherently bad. The Yetzer Hara is a force in our existence that can lead us to bad, But we're not created with anything that is inherently bad that can't be changed. And what we're being told is take the force of the Yetzer Hara and apply it to good. You know, if you were the kind of person who wants to have power, you can either become a dictator or you can become a great leader. Right? It depends how you apply that Yetzer Hara for power. All of the jealousy, all of these things, turn it around. Apply it to something that is useful, apply it to something that is positive, and the Yetzer Hara becomes tov miot. So that's the last piece I would share with you before any questions, and that is, this is another possibility, that on Yom Kippur, we're giving a nod through the Seir L'Azazel to the power of the negative. We're recognizing its power, we're admitting its power, and then we're making a commitment to take that strength and use it for good.
In Tefillin, we wrap the Pachiyot in Sarot Egel.
Uh-huh.
We ask, why Sarot Egel? What does it remind us of? The Egel HaZahav.
Right.
The Egel HaZahav is our Yetzer Hara.
Okay.
We give a place in the Tefillin.
We'll be a place in the Tefillin to represent the Yetzer Hara. Right? Good. Very good. Very good. All right. Now what you're doing is you're recognizing that this has power, and we're putting it to use in the Tefillin. Well done. Okay. Yes.
Just of interest, the god Pan was a god of the shepherds. And there is actually an altar to Pan in Banyas. The Arabs couldn't say P, so they called it Banyas.
Oh.
And actually even Peter Pan is derived.
So in other words, okay, the god Pan was worshipped a little bit by the Arabs, it would seem, because it created the name Banyas. Yep, well done.
And the Arabs named it.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay.
Why would you think that Yetzer Hara would be the force that would cause somebody to build a house, not have a wife?
I think what he's saying is that these things are things that could be used for good or for bad. In other words, I could have an edifice complex, and I could believe that I want to build. I'm a builder. I'm going to build. You know the poem Ozymandias, where a guy is looking at the author is looking at something that's falling into dust, and the recognition that builders. Rav Soloveitchik says builders are frowned on in the Torah. Cain was a builder. Planters are raised. Planting is different than building. Building is placing my mark on creation. I want to do. Planting is I'm going to use creation to continue to. So there you go. In other words, these are things that can go either way. Use them for the right reason. Yes.
Take the word A's, a goat. You get 70 iron.
Right.
And 7 Zion, the world of Teva. And what we're supposed to do on Yom Kippur is go above it.
Very nice. Okay. Gematria and Azal representing the word of world, the natural world, and we're going above that. Okay. Excellent. All right, everybody. Gemar Chatima Tova. All right. A good year. Please God, a year of peace and wholeness. Please God.